Good morning. Welcome to 801 South. I'm Samantha, and I'm an advocate with Compassion International. Compassion International is a child sponsorship organization. It's a one-on-one sponsorship that you have with another child in a different part of the world. It's amazing for the child to think that there's someone in another part of the world that cares about them. When you sponsor a child, that money goes to let this child attend a project in their community that is run by Compassion, and they will receive anything that they might need. And it also teaches them about Jesus, which is so important. It's a big part of Compassion. It's an opportunity to grow that relationship into something a lot deeper, and for them to think of you as a mentor, and they probably rely on you, and that's kind of your chance to be that to them in like a Christian way. So it's like, yeah, it's cool, you can write each other letters, but it's also an opportunity that you have to actually really make an impact in their life personally. After the service, we'd like to invite you to come out to the Commons, to our booth, and see some of the children involved with Compassion International. You can ask us questions and learn how you can put your faith in action by getting involved with Compassion.
Love's like a hurricane, I am a tree. Is true, and in my darkest night, you shine as bright as day. Your love amazes me. Sing it out, church, and I'll sing because you are good, and I'll dance because you are good, and I'll shout because you are good, you are good. and hearts begin believing. Redemption's bid is unrelenting. Your love goes on. Your love goes on. You carry us when the world gives way. Cover us with your endless grace. Love is relentless. Love is relentless. Your love is relentless. Oh, your love is relentless. Time is up for change and shadows. Gave the world a light to follow. Hope that shines beyond tomorrow. Your love goes on. Your love goes on. You carry us when the world gives way. Cover us in your endless
Tearing through the veil of darkness, breaking every chain, you set us free. Fighting for the furthest part, you gave your life for all to see. Tearing through the veil of darkness, breaking every chain, you set us free. Fighting for the furthest part, you gave your life for
Your love is relentless. Your love is relentless. Cover us. Your love is relentless. Carry us. Your love is relentless. Carry us. Oh, your love is relentless. Your love is relentless. Oh, your love is relentless.
your love is relentless.
We give you praise, Lord. Hallelujah. Amen. He's worthy. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, you are life, and you death has lost its sting. And oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. Sing, you are more. You are more, you are more than my words will ever say. You are Lord, you are Lord. All creation will proclaim. You are here, and in your presence I'm made whole. You are God, all else I'm letting go. And I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing. Sing it out. No other name. Lift your voice. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing. No other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing. No other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing. No other name. Jesus, Jesus. And I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus. My heart will sing, no other name. Jesus, Jesus.
Good morning, 801 South. Good morning. My name is Rebecca Dorn. I'm your host this morning, and we are so glad that you have decided to come and explore with us the new series called Mythbusters, where we are going to bust some myths of the church. And if this is your first time with 801 South, please stop by the welcome tent on your way out. We have a gift for you. Also, do stop by the Compassion International table as well. Compassion, folks, is what drives our generosity, and we at 801 South are committed to being a generous people. And so now is the time to share what we have so that the church can continue to make an impact both in our community and beyond.
Is it getting better? Do you feel the same? Will it make it easier on you now? Got so much to blame. You say one love, one life, it's one need in the night. One love, we get to share it. Leaves you, baby, if you don't care for it. Did I disappoint you? Leave a bad taste in your mouth. You act like you never had love. You want me to go out. Well, that's too late tonight. Drag the past out into the light. We're one, but we're not the same. We get to carry each other, carry each other. Whoa. Have you come here for forgiveness? Have you come to raise the dead? Have you come here to play Jesus to the lepers in your head? To ask too much, more than a lot. You gave me nothing, now it's all I got. We're one, but we're not the same. We get to hurt each other. We're doing again. You say love is a temple, love behind your love. Love is a temple, love behind your love. Ask me to enter, then you make me crawl. I can't keep holding on to what you got when all you got is hurt. One love, one blood, one life. You get to do what you should. One life with each other, sister, brother, yeah. One life, not the same. We get to carry each other, carry each other. Whoa, whoa,
In 3, 2, 1.
Now there was a time Good morning, 801 South. Hey, I'm Steven. I'm the pastor here. Did you enjoy the bumper video today? You would never believe this, but that was made by a guy. Can you believe that? I saw the group of young gentlemen up here in the front, and they were very much enjoying that bumper video. Just lots of stuff blowing up. It really has little to do with what we're going to talk about this morning. No, I'm just kidding. That's how we're starting out this new series called Mythbusters. And I just want to share with you quickly how we came up with this idea to pursue some of these topics that we're going to be talking about over the next several weeks. Leading up to the launch of 801 South earlier this spring, I was meeting with a lot of different groups of people. I was meeting with groups of people inside the Matthews United Methodist Church here. I was meeting with groups of people outside of the church, people who have spent a lot of time in church, and others with little church experience, trying to discern how we can best be helpful and how we can best be life-changing in this community in Matthews, North Carolina. And so one of those meetings that I had was with one of the Sunday school classes here in Matthews United Methodist Church. So my wife, Emily, and I went in and sat down with the class, and the name of the class is Becoming One. So it's fairly newly married couples. Several of them have very young children, so they're in the same stage of life as both Emily and I. And we talked to them about what might be most helpful as far as series and topics that we could cover in this environment of 801 South. And so they had some good ideas, and they were sharing some of their stories. And one idea they had, or one thought that they shared with us, is that their friends who are not in church, and of course, one of the key values of 801 South is unchurched, that when we do things and when we make decisions, we're always thinking of those that have little church experience or little church background. So that's what leads to a lot of the decisions that we make. And so as we reach out into the community, for those with little church background, they say that when they're talking to their friends who are unchurched, that a lot of them still have the same ideas of what church is. Some of those classic misconceptions or myth that you will hear out in the world, out in the community, among people who aren't very familiar with church itself. So we said, why not talk about some of those in here? Why not name some of those myths and then see if we can then bust those myths? So that's how we arrived at this series that we are starting here this morning. And the bumper video was just a bunch of stuff blowing up. Because that's fun, right? I mean, obviously we're going for the guys here. Ladies look confused. Why would it be so much fun to blow stuff up? We don't know. We can't answer that this morning. But here we are talking about this. How many of you actually grew up in a traditional church environment? Lots of folks this morning. Great. That's awesome. So I grew up in a very formal, very high church environment as well for many, many years. And I always remember when we would enter the sanctuary, the first thing that I wanted to do every single Sunday morning was run up to where the pulpit is and get in the pulpit and play and mess around, right? Anybody else? I mean, but people wouldn't let me do that, right? There were people in the church and my parents, and they said, no, you can't do that. You can't go up there, that space is not for you. And so this morning, what we're going to do is take a look at some of those rules that maybe you're familiar with, maybe you've heard in church. And, 801 South, we don't want to pick on anybody. We don't want to make fun of any churches. That's not what we're about. We really honestly believe that every local church is just doing what God has called them to do, and we take that seriously. But we're not going to let that keep us from having fun this morning, talking about some typical church rules. And so some of these rules that we're going to take a look at here quickly this morning they actually are written down in a book that I found these. You're going to think that I made some of this up, but actually I found this online, and I'm not going to name the church or the denominational heritage that it comes from because that's not what we're about here, but we are going to take a look at them, and I promise you this morning that I did not make these up. So here's the first one. So only the minister or persons authorized by the minister, because the minister is the official authorizer of the church, should ever be in the pulpit. And as you can see, that's not particularly helpful for us here this morning. I'm looking for the pulpit. Children, listen up, children. Children should be taught at young ages that this is a sacred spot and can never be used as a play area. And so my question is, why do they design it to look so inviting to children as a play area? I mean, it's perfect, right? You've got the staggered steps there for the choir, and you've got a pulpit that you can hide in, and you've got the lectern on the other side, and every child that walks in there wants to play in that space. And you better believe that when we played hide and go seek at church when I was a little kid, I was in that pulpit every single time. But turns out my parents were not just being party poopers. They were just following this written rule about being in the pulpit. And so this next rule that we'll take a look at here is really important. During the service, the congregation is expected to actively participate in worship. That's a great thing, right? We want people to be actively participating, not just simply observing. However, God's house is a place for reverence and worship, not loud and idle conversations between each other or cell phones. So anybody's cell phone goes off in here? That's right, we have people in the back that will come and escort you out. They will take your phone, and after we contact your parents, they can come and pick up your cell phone this morning. So, a word of warning there for that rule. This next rule is great. You know, you assume that rules are made because of something that happens, right? That they don't just people don't just conjure up rules about church, but it actually happens. So therefore, somebody needed to write a rule to combat an action. And so here we have Bibles and hymnals placed in pews are to be treated with care and respect. That's good etiquette just in general, right? Not just church, but anywhere. You want to treat people's property with respect. They should not be written on or used to dispose of gum. I mean, who is like finishing up their wad of bubble gum and just looking around for a place to put it, and they're like, oh, here's a Bible. Let me open it up just right there in the middle. And so the next person that comes along opens it up, and there's gum in it. Anybody have a confession to make this morning? Was that you? Are you the reason for this church rule? Just be honest this morning. All right, but could you imagine that? Who thinks that that's okay? All right, church or unchurched? Okay, this next, and I narrowed this down to 6, and there were pages and pages. Okay, it was so tough for me only to choose 6 from this list of rules that I found. So, some of these rules, it's funny what they imply by what they don't say. Part of your commitment to God is to use language that honors God. Swearing in the sanctuary or any other part of the church is forbidden. However, on the way to the church, in the car, with your children, with your family, on the phone later in the day, any other time on Sunday really is okay, or any other time during the week, right? I mean, isn't that kind of implied here by what's not said? Just something to think about as we look at these church rules. And so finally here, I think this is the last one that we'll take a look at this morning. No food, beverages, or chewing gum, remember the hymnals and the Bibles thing, no gum in those, is allowed in worship. This is another way of respecting the sanctity of God's house. Use of these items is too casual in church and runs the risk of ruining church property and wasting tithes made to God on repairs that would not otherwise be necessary. Are you familiar with playing the God card? Anybody that grew up in church learned how to play the God card. For most of us guys, we used it in relationships, right? When we were ready to break up with a girl, we sat down with her and said, listen, I've been praying about this, and I've just really discerned from the Lord above that it just wasn't meant to be, right? I mean, you just brought God in it. You know, you ignored God throughout the whole rest of the relationship, but you're going to bring him in at the end when it's useful to split the relationship apart. Well, that's playing the God card. This is one of the greatest uses of the God card I've ever seen right here, right? So you spilled your drink, and guess what? That money was going to go to feed a starving orphan. Now it has to go to pay somebody to clean up your mess you made. I hope you're proud of yourself. All right, this is the ultimate playing the God card right here. I mean, for many people out there, for those with little church experience, they see church as just a bunch of rules. And here, literally this morning, it is a bunch of rules. These are internal rules, right, for those of us that are in the church, for us to follow when we get together and when we gather for these worship experiences. But there are those out in the world outside of the church that think of church as a bunch of rules. And this morning I think we can group all of those rules that people think of when they think about Christianity, when they think about following Jesus, when they think about the church. We can group all of those rules into 3 categories. So the first category this morning that we'll list rules into is the S word that you're not allowed to say in church, especially around mixed company. So we've got some younger ones in here, so I won't actually say it. But let's just say around our most intimate relationships. Is everybody tracking with me this morning? Anybody not there, go ahead and give an elbow to somebody if they're like, what's he talking about? Right? Okay. So that most intimate relationship that we share with people, right? A lot of the rules that people think of when they think of church have to do with that. For example, you don't watch things that are explicit about that relationship. That's one of the rules, right? The other is that most intimate relationship is reserved for marriage, is another rule that we have with that, right? For that, when people think of church and they think of rules, that's one of the ones that is classic and comes to mind, that is only for marriage alone. And so that's one category and we'll just leave that there for now and not go too much further into that category. But the other 2 categories are what goes in your mouth and what comes out of your mouth, right? So let's think about what goes in your mouth. So no drinking, right? No drinking, no smoking, right? Sometimes you hear the word gluttony used. We're supposed to be careful about how much of what we eat goes in. And so one subcategory of those rules is taking a look at what goes in. Obviously, no drug use, right? That church would cramp my style when it comes to what goes in my mouth. And then the final category is what goes out of my mouth, right? So no gossip, no cussing, no lying, all those things that come out of our mouth. That's the other subcategory of church rules that a lot of people who are not involved with church think of when you start to consider rules and when you start to consider the church. So no lying, no foul language, at least not on the campus, right? Especially not on the campus. It's actually forbidden on the campus, but maybe at other times too or other places. So those things that come out of our mouth. And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about busting some of these myths and to name them out loud is to say that they do exist, but also for those of us that we love Jesus, right? We follow Jesus Christ with our lives, that we believe all of these things that we teach and that we hear in this place. For those of us that fall into that category, that hopefully this series over these next 4 weeks will be helpful to you to give you a different language to use when you're talking to people who are disconnected, when you're talking to those who are unchurched, when you're talking to people for whom the idea of a list of rules is what comes to mind when they think of church. Hopefully this series will give you some fresh language to use in conversation with those people. And for those of you that are with us this morning that aren't believers, you don't believe in Jesus, you don't believe that he's the Son of God, you don't believe in a lot of this faith talk that you hear about in this place. First of all, I'm so excited that you're here this morning. I'd rather you be no other place than in these seats. And secondly, I hope that this series can give you a fresh perspective and that you hear something or see things a little bit differently because of being here over this next 4 weeks of our Mythbusters series. And so to take a look at rules versus the Christian faith, I want to look at a passage where we see Jesus sitting down with some of his best friends. And so the passage that we're going to take a look at from Scripture comes to us from the book of John this morning. And it comes from the 15th chapter. And what we see here to set this scene up is that Jesus is gathered in a room with his best friends, right? You hear them called disciples, you hear them called apostles. It was 12 guys that he chose in his ministry here on earth, that he specifically chose these guys, and when he chose them, they left everything that they had. They left their family, they left their job, they left their career, they left their home. Everything they had, they left to travel around and basically be homeless with Jesus for about 3 years. And so John is one of those guys, and he's recording this scene in his book that he writes about Jesus sitting down in a room and actually sharing a meal with his best friends. And so we'll start here in the 15th chapter, and Jesus is talking about what this really means. So he starts out by talking about a relationship. Jesus is talking to his best friends, and he says, "As the Father loved me, I too have loved you. Remain in my love." So Jesus never starts with the rules. He always starts with the relationship. And so if the myth out there in the world and in our culture is that church is a bunch of rules, which sometimes we as the church, we play into that, and we propagate that language and that message to the world, Jesus never starts with the rules. If the church is about rules, God is about a relationship. And that's what Jesus says here. He uses this metaphor of father and son, and that in itself is a relationship. And the relationship is all about love, and he's telling his friends, remain in my love. And he continues, if you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. So the rules or the laws or the commandments that Jesus is speaking about here are not to get you into the relationship. They are to keep you in the relationship. They are to show you if you are on track in the relationship. And so it's not about following the rules. It's about using the rules as a tool to see how the relationship is going. He says, I have said these things to you so that my joy will be in you and your joy will be complete. This is my commandment, to love each other just as I have loved you. So the greatest rule of all that Jesus gives us is to love one another. To love one another. That's the highest rule, and that's the greatest way to know if we're on track in our relationships, is if we are loving one another. And Jesus continues here to teach his friends in this moment here as they gather around a meal. He says, no one has greater love than to give up one's life for one's friends. Now remember, Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen following this meal, that he is called to give up his life. They probably don't really know what he's talking about here. They probably think he's just teaching some, ethereal philosophy. But yet he's predicting his own future, and they'll find out shortly. He says, you are my friends if you do what I command you. Again, another relationship. Just like father and son is a relationship, we are in relationship with our friends. That it's not about rules for God, it's about relationship. He says, I don't call you servants any longer because servants don't know what their master is doing. Instead, I call you friends because everything I heard from my Father I have made known to you. So some people think it's maybe not rules, but it's about the information. If we can just have the right information, if there's some kind of secret knowledge that we can gain, maybe that's what God is really all about. If he's not about rules, maybe he's about some kind of knowledge that we can seek and we can gain. And Jesus says, there is no knowledge that I haven't shared with you. There's nothing that I haven't laid before you. There's nothing that I haven't already told you about that exists about this relationship. And so finally, Jesus reminds his friends, he says, you didn't choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you could go and produce fruit and so that your fruit could last. As a result, whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. I give you these commandments so that you can love each other. So that you can love each other. And so for Jesus, it's not about the rules. It's about the relationship. But the rules are helpful. The commandments are helpful within the relationship. The laws are a tool to help guide you through this relationship. And so church isn't about rules. Instead, the rules are the rails to the relationship. That if God is all about the relationship, he gives us as a gift some guidelines so that we know if we're on track with this relationship that he asks us to enter into. That he calls all of us through his love that is relentless, that is always pursuing us as his creation, as his first love, as the lover of our souls, that he's calling us into this relationship, not to follow some rules, but he helps us with giving us some rails to see if we're on track in the relationship. And so think of this not just in terms of our relationship to God, right? Not just in our relationship to God through Jesus Christ, but what about our relationship to others in life? What about our relationships with our friends? What about our relationships with our family members, with our parents, with our children, with our coworkers, with our neighbors? What if the same rails that Jesus gives us for the relationship to being God are the same rails for our relationships with one another? That if Jesus gives us these so that we can experience joy and experience life, imagine for those most intimate relationships that you have, what would it look like for you to experience joy and love in those relationships? What if we took the rules that we hear about in church and we said, you know what, it's not about rules, it's about relationship. But those rules are very helpful to know where I stand in my relationship with others. And so we think about those things that come out of our mouth. When you hear about church rules, not to lie, not to cuss, how many times when it goes to using foul language, how many times when it goes to lying and being dishonest, does that bring joy in our relationships around us? Does that bring love in our relationships with those around us? What about what goes in our mouth? When we think about what we put in our bodies, right? We think about church as being oppressive, as being a bunch of rules, as not allowing me to enjoy life. And that's why I don't participate in church. What if those rules about what goes in our mouth that we find throughout Scripture and other places and we are taught in church are the rails that help us with our relationships with others? You know, how often when we put those things in our bodies are they helpful to experience joy and to experience love with others? So not just are these rails that Jesus provides for us in our relationship to God helpful with that, but also with those relationships with each other. You see, here's the thing about those rules. That book that was written, that we pulled those rules out, that we laughed about, that we think are funny. At the very beginning of that book, it says most of these rules are common sense. Here's why we talk about rules. Because we try to apply common sense to that which does not make any sense. And Jesus' love for us makes no sense. The Scripture tells us, the Bible tells us, that Jesus followed all the rules. So we don't have to. And we will fail every time we spend our lives trying to follow rules. It's not going to happen. We can't do it. We can't follow the rules. But Jesus followed all the rules, and that's where our righteousness is found. We become righteous when we enter into that relationship with the one who followed all the rules. But we cannot apply common sense to that which does not make sense, which is the love that God has for each one of us in this place, in this morning, as his people, that he wants to call each one of us friends. And it's an invitation into which we step. And it's no longer about rules. It's about that relationship.
Here inside your presence, taken by the wonder of you. Here inside your glory, give our lives fully to you. Here inside your presence, taken by the wonder of you. Here inside your glory, give our lives fully to you. We cry, holy, holy are you. We cry, holy, holy are you.
This morning we have an opportunity to live into this relationship. For many of you, it's just going to be a reminder of this relationship that you have with our living God through His Son, Jesus Christ. For some of you, it might be a brand new relationship that you're deciding to enter into this morning. So this morning, we're going to receive communion. We are going to take the body and the blood of the one who followed all the rules and who gives us our righteousness through that relationship with Him. And for those of you this morning that have never made the decision to trust Him with your entire life, to follow Jesus Christ, we encourage you to do that this morning, that if you feel like God is pulling on you to make that decision. And this morning when you received your message notes on the way in, there's a little box that you can check and fill out some information. Just fill that out and leave it with us at the tents outside. And we have a gift for you to help you live into that decision. And we want to contact you and pray with you. But for those of you that are ready just to come and receive the blood and the body of our Savior, Jesus Christ, now is that time. All are invited. You come and we receive it through intinction. You receive the bread, it's given to you, and then you dip it in the blood or in the wine this morning. So for all those who want to live into this relationship and be reminded of Jesus' love for us, come receive His body and His blood.
Love it burns inside, hearts are satisfied by you.
For those that have already received it this morning in your seats, stand with us and sing these words this morning. Sing them out like you believe them with passion, with the same passion that led Jesus Christ to the cross for you so that he can call you friend.
Let this love be like a fire. Let our lives be like a flame. Fill our souls with your desire. Let our passion bring you fame. Let this love be like a fire. Let our lives be like a flame. Fill our souls with your desire. Let this passion bring you fame. Let this love be like a fire. Let our lives be like a flame. Fill our souls with your desire. Let our passion bring you fame. Let this love be like a fire. Let this life be like a flame. Fill our soul with your desire. Let our passion bring you We are your burning, we are your burning ones. We are consumed by you. We set our lives upon Jesus. We are consumed by you. Sing that one more time. We are your burning ones, Jesus. We are consumed by you, yeah. We set our lives upon Jesus. We are consumed by you.
Thank you again for making 801 South part of your day today. And listen, small groups are going great. So if you have not made it a priority yet to sign up for a small group, please do so at the Next Step tent on your way out. And have a great week, and we'll see you next week.